It came on. Okay. I wasn't sure if things were going to work this morning. I guess they did. That's good. Well, after the mess of the last couple of days, the question is, how did these turn out after they got primed again? So we'll take a look. Hopefully they're okay, in which case I will then be able to just put them in the in-process box and move along to other tiny little bits of this famous Ford model. I'm kind of getting to a point where I'm stuck, though, other than prepping some parts and doing some priming, because I'm waiting for the 1/4-inch tape that I need to mask the stripe, which runs down the entire body of the car, because the decals that came with the kit really they're not correct in almost every way, other than that they're yellow. Okay. They're yellow and they're the right width, but the nose is wrong and the lettering on them is wrong, and it's just wrong. So, yeah. So I'm going to do some just little stuff today. These tubes, they call them injection ram tubes or velocity tubes or Venturi tubes. Those are painted. But then I realized that they're not installed until after the cover is put on. At least that's what they suggest, which does make sense because the bottom parts will slide through the cover, but the top parts won't. So it has to go in that way. So I'm going to test fit these guys to make sure that they fit into the openings in the engine, where they're supposed to be cemented. And so I'll be doing that, and then I'll be putting them in the little bit of painted box. I could probably tape the inside of this, because that's supposed to not be painted green. And then I can probably pull out the last little bits here, the radius rods and the knockoffs, tiny little pieces, and prep them, finish painting the mirrors. And then I can work on the tires, the logos on the tires. So I probably have enough to do. Oh yeah, and then I have to fix this. That was not molded correctly. Moving stuff around. So far, I haven't knocked anything over, which is kind of a surprise. But what's happening here is that the in-process box is getting really crowded. And the done box, the box of stuff that's done, that's the thing into which I need to try to fit those velocity stacks. So I'll leave this here. I'm going to need, well, I don't know. After I'm done with the tires, they can go in here. Thinking of getting a bigger box, which I have. Even the done box. The done box has parts. They're done, but not yet installed. Okay, so they're done, but not done. Like the exhaust and the radiator. Well, if I get the tires done today, they'll go into this box, and then there'll be room in here. And the other pieces I'm working with are just really tiny. So I'm going to move things around and maybe knock things over. I don't know. It could be interesting, but yeah. Let's examine these first. These are two halves that are cemented together. And the thing was to not let the seams show. That's just the painting. Yeah, this one looks like it's going to be okay. I'm going to just put this, I'm going to set this here. This is a giant piece of cardboard for tiny little pieces. That's kind of annoying. These are going to be painted green. The last time I painted them green, it turned out to be a disaster, and then I had to take all the green paint off and start over. That wasn't fun. No, I'm going to put a second coat of aluminum paint on these and then turn them over and paint the front side. But first, I've got all these things you can't see. I've got all these little velocity tubes in these clips, which I used to hold them while I was painting them. And I need to test fit them. I'm going to put this here. So far, I haven't knocked anything over, which is kind of nice. Stuff I don't need in places I don't need it. This is dirty, so it's got little pieces of plastic and stuff on it. So what I need to do is I need to take this done part. And these little bits are supposed to fit in these little holes. Yeah, and it's a good thing I'm checking because they absolutely don't. They just totally, absolutely do not fit. Actually not even close to fitting. Trying to be careful with this. I don't want to break anything because there's all sorts of tiny little suspension parts on that. Yeah, great. None of these fit. Okay, so knowing that, put that aside. What? No, I didn't have. Oh, yeah. This thing got knocked over. Cascading thing. A thing got knocked over and knocked into other things, bounced into other things. Yeah, I was hoping not to have to do this, but I guess I do. The these little bits down at the end here need to be made smaller. And it's a question of not just taking off the primer that's on there, but the chrome plating probably is in the way as well. So all 8 of these are going to need the same sort of custom filing to make the little pins smaller so that they fit in the openings, in the headers of the engine. And I guess it's okay if they're a little too small, because hopefully the adhesive will hold them. So I'm rotating them to get it, so that they're more or less even. And I'm taking off the chrome plating. So it's down to the bare plastic. So here's one of them that is done like that, delicately done, delicately filed. I wasn't planning to be spending a half an hour or more this morning doing this, but like it says, it might be okay. Maybe. That comes really close to fitting. Just a little bit more. This is going to be each one of these is going to have to be tested. I can't, they have to be kind of like universally fitting, because I can't, I could, but I'm not going to like bespoke each one of these individually. So the problem here is that this particular hole is a little bit too small compared to the others. Paint on the inside of it or something. And as I said about these velocity stacks many times, once the model is put together correctly, if it's put together incorrectly, they will be very visible. If it's put together correctly, they will be invisible because they'll be covered up by the parts that I showed you when I started the stream, that I had painted and repainted twice. And you're saying, why do I keep moving this piece back and forth? That's a good question. The reason is that I'm filing this, all the little dirt gets. This is going to be really inconvenient. Okay, so that one fits. I've got this box of little parts, little bitty parts. I'm just going to leave this here, right here, where it's sort of visible. So you can watch me drop them into there, and then I'll count them later to make sure I got all of them. These are now in the way. Yeah, I have to be kind of careful with this because I don't want to. I want to get right on up to this edge here without screwing up the paint above it, which I'll probably do somewhere on one of these once somehow. I need some sort of monologue material here for this really boring little detail work. For some reason I can't explain, The Mr. Ed theme kept going through my head this morning after I woke up. I don't think I was having a nightmare about Mr. Ed, but for some reason, the theme song kept going through my head. A horse is a horse, of course, of course. And no one can talk to a horse, of course, that is a course, unless the horse is the famous Mr. Ed. Oh, what is it? People yakety yak all day and waste your time away. Mr. Ed will never talk unless he has something to say. Which I keep, every time I go through this, I keep saying that's true of anyone. You know, the thing you say may not be meaningful, might be droll, might be stupid, you know, but you do have something to say. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to say it. But yeah, no, it's enough of that. The last time I went down and on about the Mr. Ed theme, I just talked about how they just rhymed course with course with course with course. Except for once they said endorse. Yay. Horse course endorse. I'm just, wow, totally like out of, I don't have anything to say. I'm like Mr. Ed, but I don't have anything to say. So if I don't have anything to say, I can't talk, because I can only talk if I have something to say, because that would be the thing I would say while I was talking. In the absence of something to say, how can I talk? Probably test these on the other side. Go a little bit on the tight side. It doesn't take much, you know. We're looking at tiny, tiny little fractions of millimeters of the plastic material here. It's the difference between fitting into that opening and not. So there's 8 openings, and one of them is slightly smaller than the other 7. So that's just, if it fits on that one, it'll fit on the rest. Hi, Cyrus. Thank you, but thanks for being a lurker. I will try to maintain some sort of entertaining monologue while I am very, very carefully scraping off excess paint, chrome plating, and a tiny little bit of plastic on the little pins on the bottoms of these parts, which are supposed to be velocity stacks or parts, you know, the way they work is like Venturi tubes that increase the speed, the velocity of the air going into the engine. And these tiny little pegs go into tiny little holes in the headers of the engine, which is over there that you can't see because it's slightly off camera. And they don't fit unless I take this stuff off. How did that happen? There's now a flaw in the paint. I'll have to decide whether to put a touch of paint on that or not. But what I'm doing is attempting to make this Lotus-Ford model look good, which is a little bit difficult because it's poorly made. And almost all of the parts have required significant manipulation, sanding and filing and everything else. Stuff like this, like filing down little bits of paint and chrome plating on parts to make them fit into other parts. These won't go on until near the end. So there's some really big things that need to be done, like painting the yellow stripe down the center of the top of the body. That once done, leads to just little things that need to be done, like installing the fuel and oil filler covers, and actually somehow figuring out how to cement it on, because it didn't fit. The engine cover doesn't fit at all. And that's going to require some significant manipulation to get it to fit by putting a brace across it to widen it. It's molded too narrow. The distance from one side to the other is smaller by a significant amount, like a full millimeter, compared to what it needs to be. Yeah, each of these parts is different. Like the last one I did, it got small enough really quickly. This one, I don't know, there's more plastic on it. I need to file off like twice as much as I did on the other one. I built this model, not, the same sort of model, the original kit, when I built this back in like 1966 or whatever it was. The way you get these parts to fit when they don't fit is you just put enough plastic, you put enough of that cement on that melts the plastic, and it melts enough of the plastic that you can just force the part together. And then what you've got is the big blob of melted plastic. But, who would notice it back then? But I would notice it now, and so I'm doing this to get the parts to fit. Hopefully, when the time comes, they will fit. What I found with this model is that assembling it according to the instructions would have led to a real disaster. Like the front suspension. Well, actually, yeah, both front and rear suspensions have multiple parts that need to fit together. And I did it again. If I'd followed the instructions, which said, put this piece on first and wait for the cement to thoroughly set, the other parts would not have fit, because it would have been like the gap would have been too big, okay, between where the parts fit, because it didn't set in just perfectly. And so what I ended up doing was using a contact cement that doesn't grab right away. That gives a little bit of time. It adheres, okay? I shouldn't say that. It does grab right away. So it holds the part, but it allows for adjustments to be made. And it's a good thing I did that because the parts otherwise wouldn't have fit. So if I'd followed the instructions, then the parts wouldn't have worked. Probably when I built this back in 1966, it was another one of those things where, oh, yeah, it doesn't fit anymore. So what do I do about it? I just throw more plastic cement on, melt it more, and squeeze the parts together to force them to fit. So I've managed to put little nicks in the paint on like 3 of these, 3 out of the 8, all exactly the same way, same tiny little nick. Which if I put them on so that that little nick is toward the bottom, will be invisible, which is one way I can deal with that. The other way I can deal with it is to touch up the paint so it doesn't matter. I have to decide whether I'm going to do tiny little bits of touch-up or whether I will just make sure that they're oriented so that the flaw cannot be seen. Get little chrome plating dust all over my fingers. That's not helpful either. Okay, I have one more. And then I can put these clips away so that they're not in the way. And then move on to doing more part prep. I think that's what what I'll do next. Remember that big piece of cardboard with the tiny little pieces on it? Those tiny little pieces, which are not the tiniest, they're just small compared to some really tiny pieces that I'll be pulling out in just a little while. Those need a second coat of paint, and then they need to be rotated and painted on the other side. This stream goes on from 10 until 1. I know that this schedule, the streaming schedule, says from 10 until 2. That has been incorrect now for probably the better since the beginning of the year. Fixing that doesn't seem to be a high priority. Not something I can fix. Well, maybe if I, learned how, but why learn how if somebody else can fix it really quickly and easily? Okay, so all of these now fit into the little holes. There are 8 of them. There are 4 fuel and oil fillers. There's the transistorized ignition and a little support beam for the rear bumper, which is this bit. I'm going to leave these in here because that box is clean and this box is all full of little junk. Okay, these clips are now unnecessary and in the way. Since I've already messed up this paper towel by putting little speckles of chrome plating on it, why don't I move on to this? This is, you can see the chrome plating, right? Just how shiny it is. And because it's so shiny, it hides the flaws. It makes it really, really difficult to get these parts looking good. So you end up with things like this, okay, where the chrome plating is uneven. And this, even worse, couldn't even see. This is, I'm going to have to fill that in after I get the chrome off of this. That is a mold flaw. The molding process, right, with unnerving frequency, just way too often, puts little round depressions. These things here were originally attached down here. They came across like that. And they very much looked like they were a second bar down here. And they fell off, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to have to try to attach these somehow. You know, if you look at them, they look like they're parts. Okay, they look like they belong to it. They're thin, okay, in little bits that look like they should be attached, like that. And they both fell off. And so I was thinking, well, how am I possibly going to fix this? And then after carefully looking at the instructions, and I look at the picture of the part, they're not on there. And so these now, instead of being a disaster, are trash. The other thing that's weird, and this happened with some of the brake pads on the rear suspension, is if you look at this, there is this little rod sticking out here and not on the other one. And it really looked like that was kind of like a brace, like this would be attached to the back of the back cone. You know, these two bits attach here and here, and it looked like that would be a brace that would hold it in place. And it doesn't, it's just in the way. And it's not in the picture either. So it's there for no reason, which means it needs to be cut off in order to get the part to fit. And then the rest of this, there's sprue attachments around the edges here that need to be sanded and filed off. There's a ridge from the injection molding all the way around the top and the bottom where the two halves of the mold came together, and a little bit of plastic oozed out. So instead of a nice round tubular kind of thing, there's a ridge around it. So this is one of those things now where I'm going to be ending up spending probably, it took me a half hour to get those other little parts done, probably another half hour to get this one done so it can be primed and then painted the appropriate color. I think I actually can get the second coat of aluminum paint on these. Sometimes I get a little impatient with stuff, but in this case, I think it'll be okay because they're on this giant piece of cardboard and I can hold it like that and paint them and then move it aside and not get all of this sanding dust all over my fingers onto them. It's this paint. It's aluminum paint. These paints are made for airbrushing, so there's more solvent in it than you would get with the other tubes that are for brushing. But they cover really nicely. You know, as long as the area that's being brushed, I can brush them on. As long as that, is fairly smooth and oftentimes not too big. And even if it is large, the brush marks will kind of show initially. But I found that by using like 2 or 3 coats, works okay. I'm just looking at this. Can't tell if that needs more manipulation or not. The it's just not quite right yet. The sprue was attached right here, and it's on the very, very outside of the mirror casing. And I worked at it a couple of times now, and it's just flawed. It's like a bubble on it. That should actually fix it, that tiny little bit. Well, I'm going to paint these again with this paint. Yeah, let's do this. I know I shouldn't be doing this. I'm putting things on top of things. Don't do it that way. It will end in tears. I wait way too frequently. Lay things on top of other things and make a mess of my workbench. So I just got stuff laying around and I bounce it around, and the result is that I sometimes have some very entertaining oopses where I knock something over. Since these are taped on, I can lift this up. To make sure I'm getting it even. For the most part, what I'm making sure of is that I don't have bubbles in it. Because of the nature of the paint, we'll sometimes get air bubbles in it. And then that would very much destroy the evenness of the finish. Sort of on camera too, huh? I have to keep checking to see whether I'm on camera or not, because my camera person and producer doesn't always let me know. That is to say, I don't always notice. On one of these streams, I was painting a Mini, okay, and doing all sorts of detail and going on in my monologue narrative about the detail I was painting, and I went on for like a half an hour. And then I looked up and someone in chat said, "Oh, what you're doing isn't on camera." Of course, I hadn't looked up on chat either during the entire time because I was focusing on the thing I was painting. So that was kind of, well, I'm starting to consider those to be features. It's not a flaw. It's a feature of this stream. Okay, so Now, I used a tiny bit of that one dot of paint and put a second coat on the backs of the mirrors. Hi, Aman. Are you caught in the heat wave in Europe? I saw that it's all the way from like Denmark down to the toe of Italy. That it's really quite warm. We're going to be pretty warm here too. The next few days. Last week we had a big heat wave. In Fahrenheit, we were in the mid 90s. Some places were over 100. So are you taking care? Do you have like an air conditioned place you can be? That's good. So you just have a few more days of it. But still, I know it's pretty dangerous. I was reading that there have been. Oh, that's good. Okay. This part's just going to take a lot of cleaning up. Fair amount of it I'm going to be doing with sandpaper, but some of this is like the sprue. I don't know. You can see it. I'd like to move the camera down closer, which gives you an opportunity to see sort of what I'm doing, but also gives a great opportunity for it to be off camera because I don't have to wander very far to get off camera. So this I'm filing off is where the sprue was attached. I'm going to get a wider file. This is actually a little. The narrower the file, the more likely it is to slide off. So with a broader file, you can see it can go in either direction and not slide off quite as badly. I'm going to use this to clean off like about 90% of what needs to come off. And then I'll use sandpaper for the rest because this leaves scratch marks and replaces one flaw with another. I'm going to have to get almost all of the chrome plating off of this because the chrome plating is uneven. And there are mold seams all around the top and the bottom. So in order to make, if I wanted to, I could just cement it on like this and it's nice and shiny, and it's so shiny you can't tell that there are problems with it. But there are significant problems. This is a very significant problem. This protuberance here isn't here. Okay, it's not there, and it has to not be on the other side. So I'm going to have to take that off, figure out how to get that off, and then clean it down. There's just a little bit of protuberance on this one, which made me think that there should have been one on both sides. But this blob of plastic is in a different location than that. And then there's one of these circles, these molding circles right here, that if you look at it from the top and the front, it's really obvious. So after I sand this down and get the chrome plating off so I know what I'm dealing with, I'm going to have to fill that in and then sand that off as well before I prime it, because it can't be there. It's just a really very obvious flaw. Okay, this bit, I need to take most of it off somehow and then file it down and then sand it down. And probably that little bitty saw. Splittermond. Yeah, I don't know what that is. The Splittermond, like the kind of character, or is it maybe the software that you're using? Amon, what is Splittermond? Is that the name of your character? Ah, okay. Okay. So that's the name of the system. Cool. I guess I'm going to use the micro saw. I have like a nail clipper kind of thing that it's not a nail clipper. It's got this, I don't have it. Somebody else bought this. I think Alexis bought it. It's really good. It's got incredibly sharp edges. It has this beveled straight edge, and it's just great for just like grabbing stuff. Potentially like this. I mean, I could try it, and I could hold it. These things are. I mean, I could potentially just. I don't know what would happen if I did that though. So I'm not going to take a chance with that. I'm going to use something that. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I thought Haroon was the name of the character. That's the one that you're using it on. This little micro saw was one of the splurges I made. Because otherwise, when I take these things off the sprue or do this kind of adjustment, I'd be using an X-Acto knife. You're looking at me cutting into my finger, right? But I'm going very slowly with this saw, and chances are pretty high. Ah, okay. Chances are very high that because I'm not putting any pressure on this, really, that I won't cut my finger. I would really like to have this braced against something else, but I can't hold it. The more I look at this, the more this particular part, is just a nightmare of a mess. Just a huge nightmare of a mess of injection molding flaws. It's got seams where the plastic oozed out between the different between the two halves of the mold. It's got a circle that needs to be filled in. It's got this extra part that needs to come off. It had extra parts that I thought needed to stay on that fell off and created a panic. The chrome plating is quite uneven. There's little nooks and crannies where it's going to be very hard to. Yeah, I mean, look at this. You can even just see just these edges of the chrome plating filling in the triangles there. It would be so much easier to just cement that on and just say, oh, look, there's a chrome bar. Just don't look at it very closely. As opposed to what is now going to probably be the better part of almost an hour that I'm going to be taking to make this not be bad. I have to find my box of sandpaper to get more 600. Hi, Enforcer. You have 15 followers? How did you get followers? Oh, cool. Yeah. Oh my. Huh. Yeah, look at this. I didn't even see this. If you look at this, there's like this gigantic blob of chrome plating on this side, bigger than the blob on the other side. Okay. Bit of, I'll just start with this. One lesson I've learned over and over is it's so tempting to start with the easy part first, like around the top here. That would just be real easy to do. And then these little triangle supports would be at the end. And it's like I want to be finished with this, but now I've got the hardest part of the entire bit to do. How annoying. So I'm going to start with the hard part. And by taking the chrome plating off completely, I'm also at the same time, I'm hoping, getting rid of the little ridges that the molding process leaves in place. Not sure how I'm going to get on the inside of this little triangle. So I'm thinking back, I've been streaming this now for, it feels like forever, because it probably is forever. It's been years, I think, because I built the Fink model and the submarine model, and that took almost a year. Most of the Apollo, I finished the Savoia. That one actually went, by the standards of this particular stream, the Savoia went really fast, and it came out really quite well. I'm getting better at this as I do more of it. I'm not getting faster at it. It still takes the better part of forever to do simple things, but they're mostly coming out better. Yeah, the inside of this right here, this bit right here, there's excess chrome plating. There's a line from the molding process. There's everything wrong right in here. Can't get at it. So last time I went to the hobby shop, they had what looked like just what I needed for this sort of thing. They were very expensive hobby shop equivalents of like the little emery boards that you get for nail filing, but they were too coarse. They were like the least, the highest number was something like 300 or whatever. I very rarely use anything coarser than 600 because it leaves scratch marks. But those little boards, little files would have been just perfect. We're getting into this this little nook here between these two sides of the parts. And yeah, I probably can go online. I'm sure that they make them. I'd like to get some like around 800. 800 would be good, because then I could get in there and just, sand this stuff off without leaving a whole lot of, not having to end up having to polish it, which would be difficult to do unless I had little polishing sticks, right? Okay, getting in here. Maybe this is working. I'm not sure. Okay, so you might, at this point, very legitimately ask, why am I doing this? And again, I'll just say, because the chrome plating is historically inaccurate. Okay, the parts on the car were pretty much polished aluminum. I mean, they were polished. They were kind of shiny, because I've seen the real car. It's at a museum here in the state where I live. I've seen the real car. I've seen pictures of the real car. None of this was chromed. It was polished aluminum. And the chrome plating interferes. It's not smooth. It has flaws in its surface textural flaws in and of itself, and it hides other surface textural flaws that, like the ridge mark you see from the mold seams. And it also, since it needs to be painted more authentic aluminum color to begin, anyway, the paint doesn't adhere to it. You did. You started Magic the Gathering. Yeah, slow and steady wins the race, I think is one way it's put. In this case, for me, it's always true. Whenever I rush something, I think like 90% of the time, if I rush something and become impatient, it turns out to not be good. Fortunately, I have been able to correct the problem, but then I end up spending way more time fixing it than if I had just been patient to begin with. Not getting in there very well. There's a lot of shiny chrome on this. Oh no. Yeah. Well, by the time my coffee gets down here and I start drinking it, it is no longer hot enough to burn anything. It is definitely in the range of tepid. It is still warm. I mean, it tastes good. It's still warm. But it's not, nothing will burn. It's not hot enough to do that. Okay, that's a big chunk of plastic there. What I've also found with the chrome plating is that, because it's so shiny and it hides the flaws through the glare. It is glare. It's just like road glare. Anything else, it hides the flaws. And then after I prime it, almost every time I've done one of these pieces with all this chrome plating on it, after I prime it, I look at it again and go, oh, yep, well, that needs work now. I guess, the other thing I should be kind of thankful about is that my fingers still work enough to do this. It's kind of tedious, and I drop things and all of that. But yeah, there's the line. You can still see it. I don't know how well you can see it, but right here, right there's a line across that. That's from the mold, the joint between the two halves of the mold. That needs to come off. I think it looks, I got it on the other side okay, but this side, it's still there. And those are particularly, they really do spoil the look of the model, because these are supposed to be tubes, right? All of these bits are metal tubes, and these metal tubes did not have little ridges down their sides. And so when those things are still on there, when those little ridges are still on there, they just really spoil the look of the part. So, yeah, I spent a fair amount of time on every model, because every model, they're not perfectly molded. The molds always have a little gap. They just always do. Okay, in order to get that, I have to use the file, unfortunately. This part right here. The sandpaper just won't get in there at all. And there's a buildup of chrome in the corners and a line through the center. Hopefully the scratch marks won't show. Scratch marks will be less of a problem than the chrome flaws. The primer mostly adheres to the chrome. I mean, I can't, it's kind of hard to describe it. It will adhere to it, but very lightly. Oh no. Oh no. Okay, at least it's not a second-degree burn. That's good. Yeah, we have 2 dogs also, and every once in a while they just really get going. The microphone setting here filters out almost, it just filters out any sound except my voice pretty much. And so when they start barking, I can't share it with you. You don't hear it with me. But yeah, it can be pretty startling when they go, oof. But it's good to cool it off, get the heat off of it right away. Hopefully you'll be okay. I've had some significant coffee spills down here. The biggest and best coffee spill happened just as I was starting the stream. So the people who were watching didn't have a chance to enjoy watching me try to clean it up. Fortunately, it wasn't on anything I was working on, but it did. It got all under the mouse and under the keyboard. It was this, which is an oversized mug. Okay. And the whole thing spilled. Yeah, this is finally coming along. This is where that rod of plastic was attached. That shouldn't have been there to begin with. That looked like it was an important part of the part and was only done on one side, but shouldn't have been done at all. That was a weird thing. Same thing, actually, a similar, I mentioned that the rear brake pads on the rear suspension had something similar. It looked like there were attachment points, like they were made for a different model. I mean, it was very intentionally molded in, but it kept them from being installed. I mean, they couldn't be assembled because the little protuberances were in the way, but they looked like connecting points. The little protuberances that are supposed to fit into holes on the other side of the part. That's what they looked like. But there was also something similar on the Savoia. I was really surprised because the molding quality of the Savoia, although not perfect, was better than these. Part of it is because it was a much newer model. Okay. This kit was made in the mid-70s. It was a mid-70s reissue of a mid-60s, a late 60s original issue. I built this when I was young. It was the original one. And I bought this on a secondary market. But it is a kit that was made in the 1970s. The submarine I made, the kits were original kits from the 1960s. I say kits because I had 3 of them. Each one partially started in a different way. So I was able to piece together enough pieces from 3 kits to make one submarine. That worked out okay, but I needed all 3 kits because I used parts from all 3 of them in order to get one submarine constructed. Now I've got 2 partial kits laying around in boxes, and I'm hoping, there's enough parts there to make another submarine. Between the two remaining kits, there are still enough parts to make one decent submarine model. Using a toothpick here to get the sandpaper. It's that little bright line. You can see it right there. That's where the mold seam is. And it needs to go away. So the Savoia had in general, much better, I'll call it build quality. It was really, injection molding quality is what it really was. It was better than these other kits, which were made in the 70s. I think the Apollo was actually made in the late 70s or early 80s. So all of these kits so far, except for the Savoia, have been vintage kits. The Savoia is just a couple years old. But even that, there was a part right at the top, or one part, right at the top near the can of the cockpit, where there was, I put it together and it didn't fit. I could get it to kind of fit, but it didn't quite fit. And it turned out that there were bits, again, like these little protuberances, like there was a bit that was molded in that looked like it needed to be there. It was symmetric, 2 parts, and it just didn't work. And then I carefully looked at the instruction illustrations, and it was like, it's not on there. So I said, okay, well, it's not on the instructions, and I filed and sanded it off, and then it fit. So that must have been the right thing to do. Getting really, really close. Just really, there, I'm just getting it. I don't know why that last little bit of chrome shininess isn't disappearing. See what the other side's like. It's a little better. Okay, well, that took a long time because these were the hardest parts. And I don't have them perfectly clean, but I'll find out after I prime them. See if I manage to successfully get them smoothed out and evened out. So while I've been building this racer, and periodically, when I'm not complaining about the build quality of the model and ruining the error that I made, that I had to spend a lot of time correcting, when I'm not doing those things, I have talked about, watching races when this car was racing. Okay, this car won the 65 Indianapolis 500, and that's why it's famous. Okay, because it changed the nature of open wheel racing in the U.S. This is actually what happened was open wheel racing in the U.S. was dominated by front engined, Offenhauser powered cars. The Offenhauser was the mainstay racing engine for decades in the U.S. 40s, 50s, 60s, up until and it was even used later. Okay, It was a very robust engine. It was made to not blow up. Well, one was racing. It had gigantic cylinders, the size of kids' pails, kids' beach pails. They were just massive, and there were only 4 of them. So it was a fairly low revving engine. It had a 2-speed transmission, start and race. So there was like a starting gear that they used, from a standing stop, and then it got into the racing gear. So it had a pretty broad RPM range. I mean, relatively speaking, it did, but it was still on the very low end of the RPM range. I need little pieces here. And so, yeah, that was the mainstay. And it wasn't so much the engine, it was the design of the cars. They were, it was front engine, pretty bulky. They were pretty heavy cars. In some ways, they were very primitive. Like they had a solid axle. What that means is, I cut this too small now. So I'll talk about those. They were called big cars. Yeah, it's kind of funny, really. And the reason they were called big cars is that compared to the midgets and the sprints, they were big. So they were the premier car for open wheel racing in the US. The instructions for this model was very disparaging. It was really it was actually mean. I mean, these cars were open wheel racing for decades, right? Everybody enjoyed watching them. They were actually very cool cars, and the Offenhauser engine, because it had, 4 huge cylinders at low RPMs, made this growling noise. It was really an impressive sound. And the design of it was, it didn't have a header, the part that holds the valves and everything in. On almost all cars, that's a separate piece that's bolted onto the engine. And during a race, it's susceptible to the gasket, the seal can rupture, or the whole thing could warp because of the heat of the engine. And that was the weakest part of an engine, the part that was prone to failure. So the Offenhauser engine was a huge breakthrough because it didn't have one. It was made out of a solid block of metal, and it was just bored out. Okay, it's drilled out so that the cylinders would fit in from the bottom of the engine. But it had this deep guttural growling noise. It was really cool. So when this one came in, it's a modified V8, modified small displacement Ford V8. Really, I think it was the 289 engine, not the big 400, whatever, 427 or something that they came out with. They managed through a bunch of modifications to squeeze 500 horsepower out of this thing, almost 2 horsepower per cubic inch, which by modern standards is still pretty impressive. But it made this high-pitched whiny noise. This doesn't sound like a race car. This sounds like a buzzy bee. And it was novel. It was like, oh, it makes a high-pitched sound, but it just didn't have the same sensation as the Offenhauser engine. part of what I'm doing here is, this is the very end of it where it attaches to the car. It's also where the sprue was, and so there's a little ridge there of excess plastic. That's very hard to see, but can be felt. So these big cars, okay, like I said, the instructions for this were very disparaging, because the instructions for this model are trying to play up about the groundbreaking nature and total amazing coolness of this car. So the big cars had solid axle suspensions. That actually was a bad idea. A solid axle means that, in practical terms, if one wheel goes down, because it's just a solid rod, right? If it goes down on one side, it goes up on the other. And so that's just too small to use. And so they were not all that great in the turns. You know, the suspension. When it went through the turn at high speed, it was the left front tire actually came up off the track, because the force was on the outside of the front, and with the solid axle it came off. So the part of the race course we needed the most traction, which is going through the turn, it only had three wheels on the ground, on the track. So that was a problem. They sat pretty high up. They were high up. The driver sat pretty upright in their seat. And part of that was because of the engine and the way the suspension was put together. So these cars, when they came over, let's just say that in Formula One racing, you know, in Europe, the cars took a very different approach. They were made lighter and lighter. Part of that was because of the nature of the tracks they raced on. You know, in the US, it was oval tracks, and you went around in an oval. So the car just needed to turn left. And there were all sorts of things you could do with weight distribution, with the placement of the engine offset to one side and so on, so that it could get through the corners better. Formula One was on road courses, so they were turning right and left, and so there was an emphasis on braking into the turns and turning quickly, being agile. And so during when was it? It was the early 60s, really, well before 1965. Several of the team owners and drivers, like famous ones like A.J. Foyt and Roger Ward, okay, people who had been champions in open wheel racing in the U.S. several times, won the Indianapolis 500 more than once, that sort of thing. They became really interested in these Formula One cars, and thought, well, that would make our racing, as drivers, they were interested in it because they wanted, good cars to drive. So they thought this would be a good innovation. So they went over and they talked to the people who made these cars. Lotus in particular was one of the manufacturers in Formula One. fairly dominant at the time. I said, well, let's see if we can experiment with these. It's a different kind of racing. On road courses, especially the engines, the activity on the engine, the demand on the engine is quite different because you're slowing down to the turns and accelerating out of them, right? So the RPMs of the engine vary significantly as one is racing. In U.S. open wheel oval racing, that was less true. The turns were more gradual and predictable on the oval tracks. That's why you could get by with a 2-speed transmission on these Offenhauser engines and just let the engine speed accelerate and decelerate without having to move up through the gears or down through the gears or change gears. So it was not only the chassis change, which was huge because these are low-slung, very light cars with independent 4-wheel suspension, so that each wheel moved independently. So if one wheel went up, the other wheel didn't have to go down; it just stayed. So that was a big difference, a very significant difference in drivability. But until they were able to adapt them a little bit later, and they did. They ran these mid-engine cars with Offenhauser engines. They were able to adapt the engine to this, and they worked pretty well for several years. But this particular one was driven with a modified Ford V8. And it had to have more gears because the RPM range was different than the Offenhausers. But this effort started in the early 60s. And I think it was like in 1963. Well, they brought some over for testing, right, and for modifications because they had to be modified for oval racing as opposed to road course racing. There were no road courses on the open wheel circuit in the U.S. back then. At least not that I remember. I might be wrong on that. Okay, there might have been some earlier than I'm remembering. But at the time, it was all ovals, as I recall. It was an oval racing circuit. So they started bringing these over, and the first ones had a difficult time. But I think the drivers really liked them because they were light and agile, and compared to the cars that they were driving. So the first time I think they were competitive in a race was in 1964. And it was pretty much the same as this model. It was a Lotus-Ford. And they brought over one of their famous drivers, Jimmy Clark, who was one of their very, very top Formula One racers. Knew the car better than anybody else. And they were running, I think he was running in 8th place. And there was a tire failure, which maybe wasn't too surprising because if they were using the same, I don't know this for sure. So either they were using the same formulation of tires that they used on the big cars, the Offenhauser front engine cars, in which case the tire was not well suited to this particular configuration of car. Or they might, and I'm guessing that probably was the case because they had rules about tires, Everybody basically had to have the same sort of tire so that one didn't have an advantage over the other. But I think what happened was that it wasn't suited for this. And then the car was pulled out of the race. Well, it crashed because it was a tire failure. Fortunately, Clark was okay. But the other one that was racing was pulled out because they didn't want the same thing to happen. We're not really wanting another crash. which was a pretty dangerous thing to have. But in 1965, actually, the race was dominated by mid-engine cars like this. Lotus not only had the two cars, Clark and forget the other driver's name. Why am I blanking? Okay. They not only had the two cars, but they sold another 4 of them to other drivers. And because this had, they ran so well in 1964, I think like maybe they ran 33 cars in the race. And the vast majority of them, more than half, were configured like this. So, the excitement about this configuration of car winning was a little bit overblown because practically all the cars in the race had the same configuration. One of them was likely to win. So by the time this finally won the Indianapolis 500 and became famous, the changeover to this style of car, this kind of car had already happened. So I just have to say that was, to some extent, a little bit overblown, but Ford was real excited about it because it was their engine that won the race. That's why the car was preserved in the Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. It was, the not terribly good movie Ford versus Ferrari. It was sort of in the same vein. Ford was trying to make it big in racing, and they did. With the GT40 was an amazing car. That one is also preserved in the same museum, the one that won that race. Dan Gurney drove that for the All-American team. So, yeah, I think that's why this is, preserved and kind of revered because of the promoing done by the Ford company because their car won. Just this little bit here where that rod bit, this bit here was attached. So this is coming along. I think I've got the mold seams sanded down around the edges, probably not as cleanly on the inside here as I would like. But it's pretty hard to get that. Pretty hard to get in there. These are okay. I've got the back of this really close. And then what I've got left is that spot right there. And that's the molding circle. And it's just deep enough that I don't want to sand it out. It would leave a pretty significant divot in the if I sanded that down so that the circle wasn't there, it would leave a pretty significant divot that I don't want to have. I'm going to put some filler in that. And as I've said over and over and over, the chrome plating can hide flaws that are invisible until it's primed. And that is probably the case here. I'm going to see if the green stuff putty will adhere to that. Because what I'd like to do, I would like to all it took. This stuff sets up in like a half hour, okay? And what I'd like to be able to do is finish sanding this and clean it. And prime it between now and Friday. So speaking of Friday, Friday's a big holiday here in the U.S. Okay, so I'm expecting that people in the U.S. aren't going to be watching this stream, but a lot of people are watching it from not in the U.S. and they don't care about the big holiday on Friday. And I don't have anything else I need to be doing that morning. We're not going out for a picnic or anything like that. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and do the stream on Friday anyway. I might end it a little early. I mean, there's a chance I could not go until 1, and I might just go until, depending on how things are going, what's being done and how it's moving along. I might end it a little bit early. But I am going to stream on Friday anyway. Just because. Just to keep getting some bits of progress being made on this model. Okay, so this is almost ready for priming. This is just a mess here, and since it's a mess here already, what I'm going to do next is besides just getting parts out of the way, here you can just keep looking at that. What I'm going to do yet in the stream today is I'm going to remember the mirrors. Try to remember the mirrors. And I'm going to paint the mirror faces because I painted the backs of them so far. And I also need to work on the logos of the tires. I can do that. There'll probably be time to do that yet today. What time is it? It's only going on noon. If I'm going to prime things tomorrow, I'm going to go ahead and get the remaining bits. The remaining bits, not the driver. They chrome plated the driver. I have to keep showing that. That's just hilarious. Everything got chrome plated. You could tell these were molded in green initially. Okay. Because here, this is where something grabbed onto it and dipped it into right here where it's not chrome plated. Something grabbed onto that. It even marred the plastic, so it gripped it hard and dipped it into the chrome, and the chrome just oozed on and covered everything. The same is true on this side. You can see where it grabbed on here and dipped it in. Yeah. Okay, so the remaining bits are these rods. These are connecting rods for the rear suspension. The 4 spinners that on the real car, what they did was those spinners were the bolts, the nuts, like the nuts that you get on your there's 5 on most commercial, on most there's 5 holding on the wheels on most people's vehicles. These were knockoff hubs, so you could quickly knock them off with a hammer, spin it off, change the tire, spin them back on, give it a whack. Okay. And then these tiny little bits here that you can't see because they're way over here are supposed to be retainer clips to hold on the front wheels. We will see. Okay, it looks like this is going to be really easy to mess these up. They all look alike. I hope they are. None of them are labeled. Yeah, it looks like 2 of them are longer. Oh no, these are probably, this is going to be a real pain. They're probably longer on one side than the other. The top might be longer than the bottom. It looks like there's 2 long ones and 2 short ones, but I don't know why these are connected the same right across the top here, right? And you can see the difference in length here. This one, for some reason, is way down here. I don't understand. I'll just have to say that's all part of the challenge of this particular kit, is that these highly visible parts, which go on the rear suspension, they go here, okay, between that and that, attached to the side of the car. They're very visible. They're not numbered. They're not labeled. I can't tell. What I can tell is if one tried to break these off or cut them off with a razor blade or X-Acto knife, odds are very high that they would be broken. I'm just going to saw them off, and then there will be pieces of the sprue, the tree that they're attached to when they're molded. Okay, there will be a bunch of that attached to the outside of the piece that I will then sand off. Yeah, I almost broke it even just sawing it. You could see it bend. It's flexing. Great. This is just amazing. I bet when I built this the first time in 1966 or so, I bet I broke one of these. I mean, I'm practically breaking them by being very careful here. So again, the kit is actually called Those Famous Fords. Okay. Those famous Fords. So it was a big Ford promotional kind of thing. And this was one of them. The GT40 car that won the endurance race, especially the Le Mans race, which was the most famous of the endurance races. Although the first one of the year is actually here in the States in Daytona. That's one of the famous ones also. And then there's some sort of hot rod. There's like, I think 4 kits in the series, in the famous Ford series. I'm pretty sure Ford decided that they were famous, that was a Ford marketing decision to determine that they were famous. But as I was saying, I think to be fair, the reason this car is most famous is because Ford decided it was, because their engine beat the Offenhausers and became kind of the standard engine in open wheel racing in the US for a while. I'm sorry, this is taking so long. I'm trying not to damage the parts. But they're, as you can see, I'm moving them around with my finger and trying to hold this down so it's not flexing. They have not made this easy. They have not made this easy. And then, of course, it's like, are these even going to fit? But I need to clean them up first. These are also, because they're so chrome plated, and because of the way they're injection molded, each one of these has chrome plating on them that does not enhance their appearance, is historically inaccurate, and hides the seam that almost certainly exists from the molding process. That was one. Yeah, I know. So yeah, this, you can, if I rotate this in the light, I mean, you can see the variation, especially along the edge here in the reflectivity. Maybe you can see it, maybe you can't. That's because that's where the mold line is. Yeah, they've made these so it's next to impossible to tell where the sprue ends and where the part starts. It makes it very, very easy to either leave too much plastic on it so it doesn't fit, or take too much off so it doesn't fit. But I guess this is a good use of my time. They have to come off, otherwise they can't go on the car. So this is, they have kind of a flare at the end. I mean, there's a prong on this end, so that's pretty clear. They all have that, but they look like they're, there's kind of a little bit of a hook on the other end. It's really hard to tell exactly how that piece is supposed to look. Now, these spinners, of course, they're attached to the sprue at 2 spots. So they're not going to have a nice clean end. No, they won't, because there's going to be sprue attached to them that will need to come off. And they're tiny, and they're roundish. these parts. It's kind of important to actually leave the excess sprue on it, because otherwise it will make one of these little spinner blades, one of the three, shorter than the others. When I'm done today, this paper towel gets to be tossed because it's all full of plastic dust and all sorts of other junk. Okay, there's one. Two. Three. This is the backs of them. That's how the fronts are supposed to look. Okay, I might as well take these off as well. These are tiny, tiny little rings that are supposed to hold the front tire onto the front axle. There's no way that's going to work. These holes are all filled in with chrome plating. They're not going to fit. According to the instructions, these are supposed to be cemented on without getting cement on anything else other than the inside of these rings. That strikes me as, oh, you want me to do something that can't be done. It's physically impossible. Sure, why not? These are so, I'm just going to immediately put them in this container. I'm not even going to try at this point. This late in the stream, I'm not even going to try to clean those up because, as you know, as we get into the last hour, and especially the last half hour of this stream, focus and mental focus, physical focus, whether I can even see or not, and eye-hand coordination suffer significantly. And when things go wrong, they more often than not happen during the last half hour of the stream. Okay, so I'm just going to attempt to put that in there. That's why I'm working on this inside of this tray. Okay, you can see I'm working in a tray because when I inevitably do something like drop that little bit, it lands here, and if it bounces, I put it on a paper towel to cushion it so it doesn't bounce. And then, yeah. Okay, what I've got are pieces of sprue that I don't need. I'm going to put them, and yeah, there we go. I'm starting to knock things over already. This box doesn't nicely open like most model boxes, where you lift it up. Okay, it's not, you lift it up, it opens from the end. Not a good thing. This box now just has the health set and the clear windshields. Just leave it in there so I know where it is. I'm not going to do the driver. Well, I might do it just to do it. They even give you weird painting instructions to go with it. But I'm going to put it in here because I don't want it in the way. I just got distracted here. I've got we bought some new nitrile gloves, multi-purpose gloves, and I've got 2 boxes down here, and there are no boxes in the garage, so I need to remember to take that and put that in the garage. Well, I think I'll do these first. Oh, yeah, let's get this out of the way. Put the excess tools away. So I mean, it was a game-changing thing to have these, they call them mid-engines, they were really kind of rear-engine cars, enter open-wheel racing in the U.S., changed the nature of the racing significantly. The old roadsters, didn't totally disappear until quite a bit later. There was a very famous race. It actually happened at the track that I used to go to when I was a kid. It was like in 67 or 68 or something. It was after everybody was driving one of these mid-engine cars. I mean, just absolutely everybody at that point. But a very famous driver, A.J. Foyt. Why can't I remember his those were his initials, because his name was like Agajanian, or no, that was a car owner. He had a very, very weird name, and so they just use his initials, AJ. Very famous driver. You either loved him or hated him. I mean, he was an amazing person. He could get into any kind of vehicle and win with it. He won, I think, 4 Indianapolis 500s. He won the championship, the open wheel championship, several times. He was one of the few drivers, I think there's 2 or 3, who won the Indianapolis 500 and the Daytona 500. He was able to get himself a ride down in the NASCAR circuit, which was totally different, totally separate from the USAC circuit that sponsored the open wheel racing. But he was able to get himself a ride in the Daytona 500 and actually won that race. So he did that. He won the Pikes Peak Hill Climb and all sorts of things. There aren't that many drivers who can do that anymore. There have been a couple who just, they'll get into a car and just win with it. I will name a couple. Tony Stewart did that. Okay. He raced stock cars and open wheel cars and had success in both series. He actually, his reflexes are too, I don't know how he does this. He's doing drag racing now. He actually is, I mean, these drag racers that get up to 320 miles an hour in a quarter mile. Okay, he's doing that now. He was kind of like A.J. Foyt, too, in that you either loved him or hated him, because these drivers who are really good at everything like that tended sometimes to be maybe abrasive. Is that a good way to say it? Maybe not the nicest people on the planet. He was kind of like that. A.J. Foyt was kind of like that. Well, what I was saying before I got off onto that tangent, because that's how things go here, is, you talk about something, and the next thing you know, it leads to something else. But so there was this race at the Milwaukee Mile, the place where I used to watch races, and everybody was driving one of these these cars like the Lotus-Ford, the rear engine, mid engine kind of things. And his car didn't show up. Okay. I mean, for some reason or other, it just wasn't there. He was actually one of the first people to drive one of these. When this particular car, the car of which this is a model, won the Indianapolis 500 with the Lotus, the Lotus-Ford. A.J. Foyt was one of the other people in the field who was actually driving the same car. He had, along with a couple other people, had bought one of them, one of the Lotus-Fords. So he was one of the first drivers to adopt this, but his car wasn't there. He was, and the car wasn't, and he wanted to race. So he happened to have his Offenhauser-powered sprint car. Okay, and I talked about the big cars. Okay, the sprint car was just like the big car, except it was smaller. It had the same kind of engine in it, the same kind of configuration. Front engine, rear wheel drive kind of thing. He sat up pretty tall in it, and that happened to be there, and it was, I want to be in the race, and everybody was going. It was pretty amusing. It was like, really, and sprint cars were actually made to run on dirt tracks for the most part, so it was in some ways not even set up to be racing on this mile paved oval. There's a big chunk of sprue here. There, let's see if I can stand right here. File most of that off. So they pulled that off the trailer, and everybody's having a great old time going, yeah, look at everybody's driving these sleek, low-bodied, four-wheel suspension, mid-engine cars, right, that have been dominating forever. And he pulls this it really was old, Offenhauser-powered, undersized dirt track car out, and he put it on the pole, which means in racing terms, what he did was he turned the fastest lap when they were trying to determine the lineup for the race. And so there's this picture of the start of the race, and there's this whole line of 25 or 30 of these sleek Lotus-Ford kinds of cars, and then there's this boxy, lumpy Offenhauser-powered, undersized car right up at the front. He didn't win the race, but he finished. I think he finished in the top 5. It was just like, how could this even happen? How could that possibly even happen? But that was actually a very historic kind of event, because it was just the oddity of it. So you can, there's probably pictures of it on the internet. There's pictures of everything on the internet. You might even be able to find real pictures of it, because why would anybody bother faking pictures of this event? So that was a very famous event in racing, in which, and not that long ago, about maybe 8 or 9 years ago, they had a historic race car club. People who buy and preserve old race cars. That car actually was there. You got to see it. If you were an old race fan, you have to be an old race fan, because otherwise, why would you care about something that happened like in 1967 or 68 or something like that? But yeah, there are a bunch of oldsters like me. They're looking at this going, oh my God, this is the real car who really did this thing that was really shocking. So you either loved or hated AJ Foyt, either because you're really impressed by his driving skill, or you didn't like him because he kept winning and your favorite driver didn't. Okay. I was in the hating him fan situation because my favorite driver was the guy who raced for the local leader card special. His name was Roger Ward. He was older than AJ Foyt. He'd been around longer, and he was also kind of a dominant racer. So he was kind of near the end of his career as Foyt was coming along. And then, well, anyway, there was that. Well, this came out okay. It's one down. You can see what they look like, shiny and not shiny, right? Just to go over this again, this car is a famous Ford mainly because it's a famous Ford, not because it was necessarily groundbreaking, in that it wasn't, because the ground had been broken several years prior. And then, yeah, I'm not going to get into that again. I already did that. I did that rant, Monday maybe, about wings on cars. Wings on cars destroyed open wheel racing. It was all cool and everything to see wings go on to cars when they first went on, because they started talking about downforce, and we all got excited about downforce and cornering speeds and all of that sort of thing. But the real problem, the problem is that it just creates so much turbulence that cars can't pass each other anymore. I'm going to get into that rant anyway. So there's this one race we went to. It was a more recent race, again at the same track. They brought open wheel racing back there for a couple of years, and one car was, they got out in front, and cars have very different speeds, and so it's not unusual during the race for the fastest car to basically go around the track and catch up with the slowest car. Okay. And in this particular case, it was just so dumb. There were other fast cars behind the leader of the race, and the leader of the race got caught up with the slowest car in the race at the end of the lap. Came all the way around and caught up with it, and then just got stuck there, following 2.5 car lengths behind. And it was like, well, then, if you're the fastest car stuck behind the slowest car, how come the second fastest car doesn't then catch up with you and pass you? Well, they were all just stuck. And so for the last like more than half of the race, they're just all lined up, one behind the other, the same distance apart. Nobody making any gains, nobody passing, just lined up, because the aerodynamics of these wings created so much turbulence that they couldn't get close enough to each other to pass, because the turbulence would unbalance the car and make it almost impossible to drive. And that same thing has happened in even worse in Formula One racing. where they have wings on tops of wings on tops of winglets and everything else, and the whole thing is the aerodynamics of the car without any concern really about the effect on the other cars. And so passing is a thing that has passed. I guess I'll just put it that way. It just doesn't happen anymore. Did I get I'm just looking at the mold seams. There's this little line of chrome along here. I would just as soon try to get it all done now before I primed it than having to come back and do it again later. Yeah, there it is. There's the line right here. That is the mold seam. That has not disappeared. Sorry, I was just paying attention to this thing I'm trying to get rid of on here that isn't going away. Oh yeah, I repeated my rant about how wings on cars. I mean, it's just fine if you're the only car on the track. Okay, you can set track records and take the turns faster and do all of that sort of thing, but it's devastating for the racing because cars can't get close enough to each other to pass. Even if your car is significantly faster, in terms of its capabilities, doesn't matter. If you can't get close to the car in front of you because of the turbulence. Well, there. I said I wasn't going to do that, and then I did. How's the time going here? After? I'm not sure. I'm going to probably get these guys done. I'm not going to get the little spinners done. I'm not going to get to those today. In terms of getting them cleaned up and ready to be primed. So between now and Friday, I'll get these parts primed, the rear bumper and these what do they call them? Radius rods. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like I'm not going to get the mirrors painted today either, because this kind of stuff just takes a long time to get the sanding done. Little bits of here and little bits of there, and be careful with the file here at the end and not getting too impatient. Too impatient, just impatient enough, right? But it's kind of fun to reminisce about the racing that as I saw it growing up, and how different it is now. There were lots of differences. One is that there were hardly ever any yellow flags during a race. You probably, if you're watching modern NASCAR races or even IndyCar open wheel races, it's very, very common. I mean, you'll just have accidents all the time because the cars are so much safer. Ironically, it has made the racing more accident prone. Back in the day where you were very, very likely to be seriously injured, if not killed, if you had an accident in your car, you were kind of cautious and didn't do things that could, do that to you. Just, it was significantly more dangerous than it is now. And so I think the drivers are more careful. So we'd see 1, 2, 3, there were at least 4 races, 2 open wheel and 2 stock car races at our track every year. And we'd usually see all of them when we come back. And it's like, nope, no yellows during the race. Inconceivable now. You can't even imagine that happening nowadays. But they also drove through things. And just drove through things that would cause a yellow flag now. They would, the condition of the track changed a lot during the race. And the drivers, the way they said it is the track got greasy. It got, and they weren't meaning that it was just slippery. I mean, the track got more and more slippery, but they said it got greasy because, in fact, it was getting greasy. The engines, would leak oil. Transmission fluid just lots of fluids would leak during the course of the race, and those would get onto the track, and the track would get greasy. It was not only in racing, it was just the way cars were back then. If you, if you went to a parking lot, all the cars, for regular cars, like a shopping mall, they didn't even have shopping malls. If you went to a parking lot, free mall, to a store, there would always be spill marks, oil, transmission fluid, steering fluid, brake fluid, whatever it was. The seals, materials used for the seals, was just not as good back then as it is now. And so everything leaked. Everything just did. It just leaked. And so there would be these spots under where the engine was in all the parking lots. And in fact, if you look at pictures of like expressways where there's just a lot of cars going in the same lane, you could see where the middles of the cars were because it was stained with stuff that would be dripping out of it. So there would be like 2 clear areas of pavement where the tires would go, and then there would be, through the center, it'd be darker, and that darkness was caused by oil. And this was always kind of fun. You could see, even if you couldn't see the bump, you knew where there was a bump in the road. Where a car would go thunk, make a little bit of a thunk like that, is that just downstream from where the bump was, like if there was a bump in the direction of travel just a little bit further along, there would be a big dark spot. Because what would happen was that when the car spunked, bump like that. Hi. Thanks for joining in. I really appreciate it. When a car went over a bump and it thumped like that, it, all the stuff that was leaking out, all the fluids that were leaking out, they didn't just spill out. They would sometimes stick to the bottom of the car, but when it went over a bump, it would shake them off. And so wherever there was a bump, there was always a patch of all sorts of liquids that had oozed out of a car. So that was a digression, but the thing is that in racing, the same thing happened. Stuff oozed out of the car and leaked out, and then it got on the track, and the track got slippery. And so it became more and more challenging for the drivers as the race went on. The conditions on the track nowadays, they talk about the buildup of rubber, the change in temperature, anything. It was much more extreme back then. The track got oiled. It was covered with fluids, and those fluids were slippery. That's one of the reasons why why they still had treaded tires instead of slicks back then, is that you needed them in order to maintain traction on the greasy track. Sometimes engines would blow up, okay, and really explode in the sense that, there was an explosion inside the engine or something like that. But, a gasket would blow, a cylinder rod would break, a valve would blow up, something like that. A valve would break. There were things that inside the engine that would break, and when that happened, because there's a lot of oil circulating inside the engine all the time, there would be all the oil in the engine pretty much just came out. Okay. And it did look explosive. It still happens nowadays. There's this huge puff of white smoke because all the oil in the engine comes out and it hits the hot engine and it burns. And it doesn't burn clean like with a flame. It just turns into white smoke. So that if an engine failed, there would be a huge oil leak because all the engine oil, all of it would come out. Sometimes other things would be broken as well, like you might lose your steering fluid, maybe, and your brake fluid. Those could come out as well, but it was mainly the oil. So now if that happens, they yellow flag the race and they send out a truck with 2 or 3 tons of cat litter, basically oil dry, to sop up all the oil, because on the slick tires, you hit a tiny patch of that and you lose control. Sometimes that'll happen. You'll see an engine blow. I'll just use that again because that's the expression that's used. The engine will go, the puff of smoke will happen, the car behind it will swerve and crash because it lost traction because they hit this patch of oil. That's why they yellow flag the race and spend 20 minutes spreading oil dry, cleaning up all the drops of oil that came out of the car, or at least that's what they try to do. Back in the day, none of that. Nope. Big puff of smoke. And then the whole track was all just more slippery. It just greased up faster. So there wasn't a big yellow flag and cars and trucks full of oil dry and vacuum cleaners and everything else. That didn't happen then. So in many ways, it's a lot safer. It's a lot safer, you have to say, to not have big patches of oil all over the track. The oil got all over the drivers too. That was another thing, is that usually they had like open faced helmets, and bits of tire and oil, because it's all leaking, right, and flying all over the place. It'd get in the faces of the drivers. They wore goggles because they didn't want it in their eyes, but not everybody covered. They were open-faced helmets. They didn't cover their whole face. Not everybody even wore a bandana. That was a thing to do, is to wrap a bandana. It's a big handkerchief. Okay, just a piece of cloth. Drivers would wrap that around their nose and mouth. Not everybody always did that. I mean, that was you would think that maybe breathing in all sorts of oil particles and fumes and things would be bad for you. Probably was, but they did, because that's what happened. So you'll see pictures of people, the race winner coming out of the car and taking off their helmet and their goggles, and they'd have these circles, clean circles around their eyes, and the whole rest of their face would just be black, because covered with all of that, all of the stuff that leaked out and flaked off. But again, until they had these closed-faced helmets, they were open-faced. People just would wrap a piece of cloth around their mouth and nose to keep them from being coated in the oil. It's very, very different kind of attitudes toward things. 5-point safety harnesses and things like that were not a thing. Barely had seatbelts in some of these early cars. In fact, I think, early on they didn't have seatbelts. They just didn't. In the 30s and 40s, it wasn't a thing. Completely missed this back under here. So as I'm getting close to the time to end, I finish at 1, despite what it says on the schedule of events. This streams from 10 until 1, not 10 until 2. That schedule changed a long time ago, but it never got changed on the preview site. I used to go from 10 until 2. I'd start at 10. I'd take a break about noon. I'd say I'll be back in 15, 20 minutes. I'd get back in like 40. Okay, because there's always something. And got hardly anything done. And then one time I just said, well, I'm going to skip the break and just end early. And that worked. That turned out really well. So I've been going from 10 until 1 since then. So I want to talk about Dyson Dungeons. Dyson Dungeons, actually, this stream is under Dungeons and Dragons, because in fact, Dyson Dungeons puts on an amazing Dungeons and Dragons show. We've been doing that for a long time. And it's way different from just, a webcam watching some people in their basement playing the game. We're playing the game, but we're doing it as a show. Our DM does an amazing job. She's a great voice actor. Sometimes we don't have to do anything at all. We don't have to say anything, because our DM is just playing NPCs talking to themselves, which is kind of fun. Makes our job a lot easier. We just have to react. We have to have reaction shots, because it's a show. And but yeah, you need to watch our show. It streams with a live chat on Twitch on Sundays at 2, but mostly you can catch it on YouTube or as a podcast, one way or the other. And I think you'll really enjoy it. Okay. And sometimes it's just really funny, when we go to a magic shop and try to get a deal out of the discount bin, because, every store has to have a discount bin. Things are unlabeled. You just root through them. You don't know what you're getting. That kind of stuff. It's kind of fun. Sometimes we get into serious battles. My character, which is kind of a tank kind of character for a bog fighter, has been mostly dead a couple of times. Knocked unconscious. Fortunately, revived before failing the third saving throw. Only need like a 10, to save the death saving throw, and I rolled like a 2, I think, and then I had this feat called Lucky, which allowed me to roll again. Although technically I probably shouldn't have because I was unconscious. But nonetheless, the DM said, sure, go ahead. And then I rolled a 3. I knew for sure I was doomed then. I was getting ready to roll another character, which would have been sad. But I was saved by our druid, who did a healing song and kept me from dying. That was nice. But yes, Dice and Dungeons actually is about Dungeons and Dragons, not about building old models. This painting stream started because we produce our own dungeon tiles and minifigs on 3D printers like the one behind me. And then they got painted, and our DM decided that the painting should be streamed, because I was painting anyway, and set up this not terribly good studio with a Ring camera and a used camera and a used microphone, things that weren't good enough for the show, and said, here, paint stuff, stream it. And then when there weren't any dungeon tiles or minifigs, she said, well, keep the stream going. Somebody's watching it. I don't know why, but they are. Pull out a model and work on it. And that's how I worked on the submarine and the Fink Eliminator and the Savoia S21 and this car. And it's, kind of an amateur how-to show, in that it's, if you really don't know what you're doing and there's no way you can emulate a master modeler, you don't have the skills or the tools or the patience or the skill like me. My skill level is probably pretty much like it is for almost anybody, so anybody can do what I'm doing. And frequently you get to be amused by learning how to do something by me failing, like trying it and it doesn't work, or just messing up, which makes it kind of interesting and fun. Okay, well, at least as I was cleaning these up, they're all the same. I didn't expect that to actually be the case. I was going to say this one almost got cleaned up. But at least I couldn't see when I took them off the sprue how each one was formed. There's a little prong on each one on one end and a little bit of a flare on the other end on each one. So at least now, I can see what the part is supposed to look like, which I couldn't when it was all chrome plated. Somehow I managed to miss the end of this. I think I got the other ones clean. Yeah. So anyway, that's why this stream is happening, because I didn't have any minifigs to paint or dungeon tiles. And oftentimes I will show off the dungeon tiles. I still might have time to do that, to show you what it is that I was painting. No, I'm not going to get to it today. On Friday, I'll remember to show off the dungeon tiles, because they're really amazing, just in terms of their features and their build quality. Our DM, Alexis, spent many, many, many hours developing the files, the printing files for these things, so that they come out like flawless. They're just beautiful in terms of their detail. And then they take the paint really well too, so that they look really nice when they're painted. Okay, I've got these bits. It doesn't look like much, but I've got these bits that are ready to be primed. And I'm going to do that then tomorrow, so that on Friday, assuming that I didn't miss any flaws, okay, excuse me, on Friday I'll be able to paint them aluminum. Okay. These are the spinners. I'm not going to get to these today. I'm just going to put them in here so they don't get lost. And on Friday, I'll clean those up. I didn't get around to working on the logos, the Firestone logos on the tires today either, but that's okay. That gives me something to do then. So as I said, Friday is a big holiday here in the States, but I'm going to go ahead and stream in the morning anyway. I may end up I might end up wrapping up early. I'm not sure. I just might, depending on how things go. But what I'll have these bits to look at to make sure that there isn't a lot of flaws showing on them. And if they're okay, then I'll paint them the metallic color that they should be painted. I've got these mirrors here. This is what I'll do the rest of the session here. I'm going to get another piece of cardboard. Be right back. I just needed a smaller piece of cardboard because the one that I've got here is just way too big and it's in the way. So I'm going to get this smaller piece of cardboard and I'm going to take these mirrors and put them on here so that I can use this bigger piece of cardboard for these parts here that need to be primed. And I'm going to take this and put this, I'm going to put it in this tray after I clean it up. Okay, I'm just gonna fuss with this, right? Here I am just fussing with this. These bits need to be taped down to this tray so that when I spray paint them with the primer, they don't go flying. So I'm going to just take some little pieces of tape. Well, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean them. What have I got left? I got 10 minutes. I should be able to finish this without messing up anything. It's a good idea. I'm recommending this to anybody who's building models. Okay, it's a good idea to wash your parts before painting them. In this particular case, it's really an important thing because it's got sanding dust all over them as well as fingerprints. And the paint will adhere to the sanding dust, which will not adhere to the part underneath it. Or maybe it will. In either case, it'll be bad. Okay. If the paint adheres to the sanding dust, and the sanding dust does not adhere to the part underneath, then the sanding dust will come off along with the paint. If it does adhere, if the sanding dust does adhere to the part underneath, then we'll have all sorts of little lumpiness, grittiness on the surface of the part where the sanding dust is now stuck to the part. So in either case, it's a good idea to wash them off. I'm using a little bit of isopropyl alcohol because it takes finger oils off as well. Not that that's going to matter because finger oils are going to go back on here as I adhere them. Do it like this. Okay. So I use this little bits of tape. If I can find the end of it. This is the highly not sophisticated way of doing this, but it works. Okay, just take a little piece of tape. Yeah, you can tell it's near the end of the stream. I can't even get tape off my fingers, right? And just do the folding over on a thing bit. Each of these will have to be primed on both sides. So, put it on here like this, and then prime it, and then turn it over. Probably needing a new piece of tape because most of that tape is going to be covered in primer. That's why when I go to my better ventilated area, better than down here, I take the tape with me so that I can replace the tape. The other thing on Friday is I'm expecting my 1/4 inch tape for the stripe to show up today. It's supposed to arrive today. We'll see. Either today or tomorrow, maybe. If it's here by Friday morning, I'm going to test it to make sure that I'll measure it for one thing to make sure it's really 1/4 inch because you never know what you're going to get sometimes. But I've got this thing here. See that? That's a piece of sprue that I primed and painted it so that it's just like the piece that's going to be with the stripe. And I'm going to put the tape on it. Okay, and probably at the beginning of the stream, let it set there, maybe even over the week, maybe even for a while, and make sure that it doesn't pull the paint off. Okay, like I know this particular tape, this brand of tape, I can put it on there. It sticks really well. It has a nice clean edge. See, like that. Okay, I know it doesn't pull the paint off. My regular painter's tape that you just get for painting walls and stuff sometimes will. Okay, so this is ready. That's ready for prime time. this box, all the sanding dust and stuff's on that paper towel. I'll carefully wrap it up. Got the inside of the box. Put this in the trash later. Get another piece of paper towel. I know this is ready for doing things like painting this. And then I'll put a piece of paper towel over it so it doesn't get dust and dirt on it. Right? Okay, this box is these parts are pretty much done. These aren't. These under here, these are in process. But this is the bit that's mostly done. These parts are ready for assembly. That's why they're in here. These parts, I'm going to be working on the tires on Friday. They've got a little Firestone logo. You can see it sort of raised. Here, you can still see remnants of it. I was able to find a way to make those white without using paint. And I should get to that. I can get to that on Friday maybe, is to highlight the Firestone labels on each of those. If I get the tape and it seems to be working, I might tape this. This is the thing that will have a yellow stripe on it, so the tape will go across, covering up the yellow. Then we'll paint it green. And then when I take the tape off, okay, the part that was covered by the tape should stay yellow, and the rest of it will be green, and it will look like a piece of green with a yellow stripe. So there. And if that works, then I will do the same to this. This needs to be taped on the inside so the aluminum color gets covered. The whole thing will be painted yellow. Okay. And then this part right here is the part with a stripe. Moving along. And it's really quite possible that as I'm getting near the end of this, that there won't be enough car stuff to do during a stream. Okay. So when I don't have car stuff to do during a stream, I will be working on this guy, who is me. This is my character from our Dungeons and Dragons show, also Ralph the Furbog Fighter. Flaming Longsword, Cold Blade, Ice Blade, Offhand. That used to look better than it does now. It's okay. But I need to paint its armor and then do some shading on its face. So when I run out of things to do because I'm just getting down to little fiddly bits on the race car, I'll be working on the armor here. Almost all of this is going to be painted metallic and then washed with a diluted glossy green so that it looks like really nice green metallic armor. And then I'll have silver highlights, silver and maybe even some gold highlights on the embellishments. And then the cape, I don't know, the cape, one of the other members of Dyson Dungeons, Nicole, is an artist, a real artist, said, you're going to put like 4 layers of paint on this. And I said, oh, sure, right. Well, I'll tell you what colors. You put a dark underlayer color that you don't even want ever to show again, and then you put different colors on it, and it will make it look velvety, nice and striated and velvety. And sure, why not? Why not? And these little embellishments and the edges will be silver. And we'll see how this turns out. I'll probably, like I said, be working on that. To remind everybody, I will not be here next week. I will stream on Friday, okay, but I will not be here all of next week, Monday through Friday, no stream, because I'm traveling. And when I'm away from here, I can't stream. So there won't be a stream while I'm not here. But then I'll be back. Gone Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then back the next Monday, whatever that is. Like can't remember what the dates are. 12th or something, 14th. But yes, I'll be here Friday, not next week, and then back the week after. I want to thank everybody for watching. I'll be signing off now, and I'll be seeing you again at 10 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time on Friday, where I continue to make infinitesimal, tiny incremental progress on the famous 4 model. See you then.